Welcome to Ride On, episode 26. I'm James Gross, and I'm joined by my co-host, Julia Thane. Julia, we're towards the middle of August. What's new on your end?
James, I think the same thing that's new for everybody in California or in SoCal, which is we're bracing ourselves for a hurricane. I moved away from Atlanta and I thought I'm never going to see a hurricane again. I'm on the West Coast. They don't do those things here. Lo and behold, we got a hurricane that's coming our way during the weekend. So I'm thinking about how to store my e-bike away from the rain and try to maybe change up my plans for the weekend.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see if it's just those weather stations trying to get page views, or if this is a real one.
Maybe we should start doing the weather. Yeah,
we could. Yeah. Well, you got to be really like aggressive, like show a lot of reds and yellows and urgent watches.
Yeah, we definitely couldn't do that. We better stick with just bike launches.
Yeah. So it's called Hillary, right?
So yep, sure it is.
Okay, yeah, the Hillary memes are going to come out. I'm sure that would be a big one for the internet.
I'm here for it.
Okay, cool. So that's the weather. And then on announcements this week, we still have another week of the Electric XP 3.0 giveaway. Very exciting. Thanks for everyone for, of course, submitting at ridereview.com for that Electric XP 3.0. We'll give that away next week, I believe. So yeah, get your email in, get your comments in here, subscribe to the channel, and we will announce that winner at some point next week. So yeah, that's my only announcement. Julia, I'll send it over to you for what's going on this week in the world of riding small electric vehicles.
That's it. We have to come up with a shorter tagline than that, because riding small electric vehicles just does not sound right in terms of the level of excitement we're trying to build around micromobility. So a couple of things, James, just to start out with reviving some of last week's news this week. First of all, we have some really great videos out showing both James and me riding the XOTO. The XOTO is a three-wheeled motorcycle that doesn't require a license. And whether you want to look on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, we have some videos out of us riding the XOTO around a parking lot in Venice Beach. So maybe not the most exciting place to ride an XOTO, but at the same time, a really good place to just figure out how these three-wheeled electric motorcycles work. Similarly, from last week, James, we had a wonderful interview with the CEO of Wave, which had put out a new app from GEM, one of their children companies. Is that how you say it? Children companies? It's a parent company to GEM, in any case. So one of their children companies, will go with that. GEM has a new app that shows every road in the U.S. with posted speed limits of 35 miles per hour or lower. I know that this is something that everybody's probably like, why are you announcing this? Is this really a launch? Do we really care about this? It's just a map. But honestly, when it comes to trying to get greater user adoption of low-speed electric vehicles, it's really, really important for folks to know which roads they can ride on safely right now. So to me, to be honest, sometimes announcements like this are even more interesting than what we find with the vehicle launches. So again, check it out. Check out the videos on XOTO, and also check out GEM's new app, which shows every road in the U.S. That's a slow speed road and would be good, not just for their low speed electric vehicles, but really for bikes, scooters, walking, whatever. So with that said, the big news for this week, or some of the news.
Julia, can I say something on this though? Actually,
so
on the so on the GEM thing, on the map thing, I think so. I've been doing a lot of work with speed limits down here where I live. We know that speeding, of course, is the leading cause of death as it relates to traffic deaths. And I really, I want to credit GEM for launching this, but I actually think there's a much bigger play here, which we talked briefly about in our last episode, which is this idea that one of the challenges we have with micromobility is we have, and with e-bikes, we have classes, class 1, class 2, class 3, that ranges from 20 to 28 miles per hour. And then we also have scooters. We have things like the XOTO, as we're seeing. We have neighborhood electric vehicles. And one thing we are going to need long-term is a umbrella, I think, is an umbrella term and an umbrella limit that for all micromobility vehicles. And one thing that is, I think, really cool about any street that's under 35 miles per hour in the U.S., which is a majority of the streets in the U.S., is that can be, in California at least, it can be defined as a low speed vehicle street, an LSV. And imagine a day, Julia, where again, these mapping companies, we talked a bit about it last week, but Apple and Google Maps, which together have over 3 billion users. Imagine if we could actually start to have a route planner that was specific to micromobility. And I think that's where we're going to go, because the problem is, of course, walking is one thing, biking is one thing. And again, biking in the maps structure and the way the software has been built is really for pedal bikes, acoustic bikes. It's not for micromobility vehicles. And so I really hope this is the start of, one, in general, us lowering speeds, which I think is happening. It's a trend that's happening. It's a very good trend. But two is the idea of how could we actually map people so that they're consistently on streets that are less than 35 miles per hour. And we can think about it as micromobility, especially as so many of these newer vehicles are going faster, right? That are going up potentially to 35 miles per hour. And maybe they don't belong in a bike lane. That's the next thing that will, of course, become a big topic. And so this LSV speed thing, this LSV lane and this idea of mapping streets and giving people new alternative routes that are slower, I think is a big, big deal for micromobility long term. It just needs to all be sort of worked out.
Yeah. And I would say, just to spend a couple more minutes on this subject, because I think it's a really important one and one that's important to our viewers and also listeners on the podcast. There are two folks who I'd really like to see step up here. And one is the mapping companies you mentioned, Apple, Google, whatever, just making sure that they incorporate more of these slow speed or low speed routes onto their apps directly. And the other one is city governments. When I was in London, when I lived in London, they had these things called the Quiet Streets networks. And basically what it was is just maybe slightly longer routes, but through quiet streets in London that routed folks away from big thoroughfares. They didn't have any really special infrastructure. They had some sharrows, but more so the importance was being able to route people through these quieter streets. When I moved to LA, I actually, and within the mayor's office here, I suggested the same thing. Let's build a quiet streets network. But some of what's needed is actually some tactical urbanism and some design changes around big intersections, so that when you get to, from the sort of quieter streets towards these big intersections, there's ways of people getting across those intersections safely, whether it's, a zebra crossing, as they would say in the UK, or whether it's some lights or something like that. And I think, folks often sort of overestimate how much money you have to spend on bike lane infrastructure in order to make it meaningful. And yes, you do when you're on high-speed streets and when you're trying to route people on freeways. But if you're taking people on slow streets that already have lower speeds, it's much easier and much cheaper actually to do safe infrastructure. And usually it's just focused on the intersections and crossings. So again, I think it's incumbent on the mapping companies to do some work on their end, because we all are users of those mapping engines, and then also on city policymakers to make some of these lower dollar but really high impact investments in strategic places. Have we said enough about this, or should we talk more about this?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I agree. I'm good.
Yeah. So then just moving to the actual news, the NABSA, which is the North American Bike Coalition, just released its fourth annual Shared Micromobility State of the Industry report for North America. This is really important because what it does is it shares some statistics around ridership in North America. They found some really interesting things. One, and we should all take this away, ridership in North America of shared micromobility has returned to pre-pandemic levels. So in 2022, we were at 157 million trips taken. In 2019, we're at the same level. Just showing again that folks are back to using the same levels of micromobility that they were pre-pandemic, despite our own travel patterns having changed and some of our origins and destinations having changed. So people are back to riding shared scooters. The second thing that was really interesting is that we are at an all-time high in terms of number of cities that have shared micromobility. So 401. Combined, all of these trips are removing about 74 million 74 million pounds of carbon emissions. One other thing to note, maybe, James, and to get your perspective on, is that the number of vehicles on the road is much higher. So we have about 100,000 more shared micromobility vehicles on the road now than we did in 2019. So, James, what do you think? Is this good news? Should we say shared micromobility is back? Should investors start reinvesting in shared micromobility? What's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good sign, partly because I do believe a lot of shared ridership will attrit over time to owned ridership. So people try them, like them, they buy their own, then they don't use the shared vehicle anymore. You see that time and again. Um, and so, I think it's great to see the numbers are back to where they were pre-pandemic, especially given the hit that cities took. Um, but yeah, the yield is lower, which is not, as efficient. But again, I think that was also needed. I think a lot of those vehicles were ridden too much and were pretty banged up. And then also, of course, is it seems like e-bikes, of course, are a big part of this, and increasingly e-bikes replacing pedal bikes, ideally, I think will increase the yield of those vehicles as well. So I think overall it's good news. And I think more vehicles is also fine. I think again the yield can come through higher quality vehicles, both on the bike and the scooter side. And then yeah, clearly it's great to see that this is leveled off. As we know, the bike, ownership ridership is way up since 2019. So um, being able to win on the shared front at some point here and actually see growth soon will be great as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, James, because you and I had talked about in a previous episode that in Europe, where we're seeing the increase in ridership is actually on scooters. And it's like the availability of scooters, number of scooters that are in systems, and then also just, I don't know, general usership patterns are towards scooters. In North America, it's the opposite. We're seeing e-bikes are ridden 56% more than pedal bikes in systems. And also scooter ridership is down, e-bike ridership is up. And to me, what I think that says about the North American market is folks still have a little bit of like PTSD about scooters just being flung about different places in the public realm. I think also, there's possibly something around the quality of our streets and just with the quality of the experience of being on a scooter versus being on an e-bike. And then for that matter, like this point about e-bikes being ridden more than pedal bikes, or for that matter, scooters, just seems to speak to like whether it's a city operated sharing program or privately operated sharing program. Folks just need to be investing in e-bikes. Like that's where it's at. It's like obviously just in e-bikes. So spend the money to do e-bikes rather than pedal bikes, or probably even more than scooters. So that was the big news coming out of this report. And I think to me also shows that maybe investors are too down on shared micromobility relative to its value. And I'm curious to see what happens in 2023, because I think that's going to be even a bigger marker to investors as to how they should look at this market in the future. There's been some big news over the past week about autonomous vehicles in California. A regulating organization called the California Public Utilities Commission has voted to allow for commercial service of both Waymo and Cruise vehicles. So this is huge, huge news with huge implications around the uptake of autonomous vehicles in the U.S.'s most populous states, not to mention in one of the biggest economies in the world. So I won't say too much about it here other than, James, I think you did an interview with Ed Wiedemeyer about this topic and had some good takeaways. So maybe you could just like tease that interview, and then I believe that's already posted. So folks should definitely look at the comments, look at the link, and check out James' interview with that.
Yeah, so we talked to Ed. It was great. The decision came down right after our episode, Julia. So unfortunately, we couldn't talk about it last week. But yeah, it's very big news. And Ed Niedermeyer who's written a book called Ludicrous about Tesla, and Ed is very well known as a Tesla critic. So he's not someone that believes in what Tesla's doing. He's called them out quite a bit on their self-driving policies that he thinks are dangerous. But at the same time, he is a very big proponent of L4 AVs, which of course is what Waymo and Cruise are, and this decision by the CPUC, which goes against a lot of where I would, maybe define Ed quite a bit as an urbanist, against a lot of his constituents and other people that he would generally kind of gravitate towards. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about how urbanists are wrong about L4 AVs. And, I guess probably there's quite a bit to that interview. I hope you'll watch it. But probably the money line was when Ed said, Ed actually worked for a nonprofit that was working on AV education. And their surveys showed that the people that were the biggest detractors of autonomous vehicles, meaning they were most anti-autonomous vehicles, also were the same people who self-reported. They self-reported. This wasn't like other people reporting on it. they self-reported knowing the least about them. So there is a very big education problem out there, and unfortunately, it appears as a very big education problem with people that probably should know more about this and how this technology works, which is in urbanist type communities where they are very loud. They're a minority, but they're very vocally loud, and they came out against this ruling. And of course, there's a lot of safety implications to this, and um, a lot of potentially bad things. We know a lot of bad things happen on the road, and if we aren't using technology to improve safety, I'm not quite sure what the answer is for these urbanists. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah.
It's a very good interview. I think there's going to be a lot more that's going to come out. There's a lot of heat around this topic, so it won't be the last time we talk about it.
Yeah, and I'd like to just mention for the viewers that I was not invited to this interview, so that I couldn't interject all of my, perspective around AVs and what both opportunities and challenges they present for California, for that matter, for the world. So maybe there needs to be a follow-up interview or just like a monologue of what my perspective is on AVs. I will say, though, that the one thing, it's passed. So what can you do? Like, if you agree or disagree, it doesn't really matter. Like, the CPUC has come up with this decision. There's going to be commercial services of AVs. What that means now, though, I think is folks have to be, and folks meaning policymakers in particular, have to be really conscientious about what policies are passed in this very short window that we have where it's politically palatable to pass some legislation or some regulation around EVs. The things that I would be looking to pass if I were a policymaker at the moment are things around just like pricing and vehicle miles traveled, making sure that occupancy is high enough. Also making sure that when AVs are deployed, they're deployed in a way that's hopefully shared. And then it's something around the weight of AVs and registration fees for AVs, which is where the state in particular has a lot of jurisdiction. And then I had another point. Oh, speed of AVs. I don't know. This is like a long list. I could probably prioritize in terms of what the things are, like the decision points around AVs that I think need to have some policy guidance. But that's just a list to start. And there's, again, a really robust Twitter X. There's a really robust X conversation around what the policy should be, and also around on LinkedIn around what the policy should be for AVs. And that's it.
Yes.
James, do you want to take us into the launches?
For sure. So some cool launches this week that I'll go through pretty quickly here. The first is from our friends at Ola Electric. They're out with a kind of their annual new electric motorbikes in India, which of course we know is one of the fastest growing markets in the world. So probably the one to highlight in their new motorbikes from a cost perspective is their S1X, which is going to come in at least US dollars at about just over $1,000, which of course is incredibly affordable. And we know that Ola will sell hundreds of thousands of these vehicles, which is really cool. And then on the other end of the spectrum from Ola, which we're not, at least I'm not used to in seeing their work, is they've created sort of a concept car that we'll show the video to, which is this very kind of interesting looking motorbike with what they call a Diamondhead. And there's a lot of kind of controversy on the internet on what exactly this is, but it is believed that the motorcycle is a center hub steered machine. And so I'm not even totally sure what that means, but basically it's a very different concept. And Ola is not the kind of company that just puts out concepts and that doesn't deliver. And so I'm excited to see exactly what it is that they're doing here. And again, maybe even going into a little bit more of the premium space, which is also cool. Across the pond here in the US, actually, Trek has announced the Ponto Go. So Ponto, one, is a really great beach here in Southern California in Carlsbad that we love to surf. So I like that name. But also what's more interesting, and I think this comes out of maybe last week, Julia, where you and I were talking about Trek potentially acquiring VanMoof, and I just said that's not that interesting because Trek doesn't do anything interesting in electric bikes.
You were just bored. You were generally bored. You were like,
well, this is... but this is, I have to give them credit here. This is their first moped style electric bike. It doesn't look like your typical Trek bike, and it shows that they're, I believe are being influenced by Electra, which is a brand they acquired, actually a brand here in Encinitas, California, that they acquired. So it's outfitted with a longer rack and extended bench seats, foot pegs. So it has a vibe of it that you would expect more from an electric bike than from an acoustic bike. So let's not give up. Maybe Trek is still maybe Trek can still dance. Julia, what do you think?
Trek can still dance? Does Trek dance? Wait, what's the
No,
dance reference?
there's a famous book about IBM back in the day. That was "Can Elephants Still Dance?" It was a song about one of their former CEOs, making the claim that when you get big as a company, you just don't do anything interesting anymore. You can't dance, and so
Love
that was
it.
my play there. Is
Love
can
it.
Trek
James
still
the
dance?
historian. James, I like how you
Hmm.
sometimes bring out these historical references that I have to generations back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Amazing. Yes.
Yes, amazing, amazing. So now I've gotten sidetracked from the Ponto Go. The Ponto Go, yes, I think it's really interesting. I'm glad Trek is getting into the game. To be honest, I'm waiting for some of these larger bike companies to just get a bit more savvy. It seems like they're dipping their toes in the water of electric bikes, micromobility overall, and trying to figure it out. It might be time for them to just go full throttle into it and start acquiring a few more brands and start really thinking about how their customer base has expanded and how it has differentiated and become more diverse. Because I'm sure they're operating off of decades of data that have one customer base or a certain customer base as their key customer base, and now with all of these different micromobility vehicles, that is really diversified. So again, kind of looking forward to Trek and others just changing up what they're doing and starting to have a broader set of products that they're offering under their more name brand uh, uh, retail, online, and other venues for selling.
Good. Go Trek. See what you can do. I'm going to go back over to India now with Mahindra, who's launched a new electric rickshaw. It's called the E Alpha Super, and it's a modern utility vehicle. It does about 60 miles of range on a single charge. And what's cool is it is also compatible with about 10,000 charging stations around India. So you can charge on the go if you need to. And imagine if you're a rickshaw, that could be something that's very, very important, of course, to how you ride. This is the sort of three-wheeler. It looks cool. I'm very excited about these rickshaws, of course, coming to the American market more. We have NEVs and like we talked to Gem last week, but I think the rickshaw could do really well, especially when it's electric. Especially in, I think, communities that are more open to lower speeds and think like micromobility vehicles. So I would love to see these come more to America. And then finally, again, on the three wheel or the trike front, I want to give a shout out to Voke, which is a new company. And they've created sort of what they call a blend between a go kart and a beach cruiser with a super low center of gravity, throttle based feel, and kind of swept back handlebars. So it's got that cruiser type feel. It's on Indiegogo. It is a very small vehicle. It is very low to the ground, like a go kart you would imagine, and it has a top speed of 40 miles per hour. So, Julia, will we see you on this Vogue? Is this gonna be your game? Are you gonna be on the kind of cruiser
You
cart
keep putting me on
style?
trikes. You keep, yeah.
I know, I do.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
why.
yeah. It's so interesting. I feel like you're concerned about my safety. It's like, I don't know if Julie can handle a two-wheeler, but three-wheelers she's got, maybe four-wheelers too. No, so will you see me on this? Like, yes, absolutely. I've actually had an interesting set of conversations over this past week about four-seaters and low-speed vehicles. And before, I have to be honest, I wasn't necessarily a believer. I thought, like, what is the use case for this beyond the stereotypical sort of like uh, I can't think of another phrase besides golf communities, but basically golf communities or retirement
Hmm.
communities for these. But I've actually become much more of a believer because I think when you have a four-seater and you have something that doesn't require a license, all of a sudden you just have like a whole set of users, riders that can take advantage of this, that are on the younger side, so they're teens, tweens, and then also on the older side. It's much more adaptable to different levels of accessibility. And for that matter, some of them honestly just like look kind of cool. Like they're just fun. And I'm the one in the micromobility community who's always about community and about how do we bring in like good urban design with some of the micromobility vehicles that are launching. And I think what I like about these four-seaters, the go-karts, the beach cruisers, the rickshaws, is that they do offer a better sense of connection between the rider and then the external environment. Like you're more a part of the urban fabric and care more about the part of the urban fabric when you are not ensconced in thousands of pounds of steel, which is currently how we experience, many of the urban environments in the US. And it is really disconnected us. It's made us like lonelier people, and has done a lot for sort of reducing each person's sense of responsibility for their surroundings. I don't know if I could probably come up with some references for that, but let's just call that, Julia's hypothesis around what's going on with a sort of lack of urban community here. Maybe let me say a few more things, James, which
Yeah.
is the other thing that's been coming up in these conversations around four-seaters and things like electric rickshaws is what their business model is. Like, are these privately owned? Are these shared? Are these used for commercial or as commercial vehicles, whether they're as taxis or as delivery vehicles? And I'm curious what your answer to this is, James, but my answer is sort of like all of the above. I think the shared low-speed vehicle market is going to be small when it comes to things like, trying to incorporate low-speed vehicles into public transit. I think it's going to be much larger when it's privately owned or when it's commercially used, again, either for passenger transport or for goods transport, things like, last mile deliveries. That has design implications on the vehicle itself. So if I were a designer of a vehicle, those are the business models I'd be thinking about. I'd be thinking less of this as a shared micromobility option incorporated into transit. What do you think, James? Does that
I
sound right to
agree.
you?
Yeah, totally. I think all these vehicles that I just mentioned today and in general, I think they reflect whether it's a portfolio of vehicles people will buy for different types of rides, right? So, I take my trike, my electric go-kart trike out this time of the day. I take my rickshaw out this time of the day. Um, I think that's a choice that you can make because these price points are lower, and you could potentially, you don't have to do, of course, what we all know about the vehicle, which is bundle all trips into one vehicle. And of course, that means a much higher price. So I think that's definitely potentially an option. I think this goes back to what you said earlier on the mapping and the speed limit, though. I think where it gets really interesting is if there's more roads that these things are accessible to. For instance, the Vogue, when you see it, like, you're not going to take this on any road where people are going 45 miles per hour. It's simply too low to the ground. I mean, you could put a huge flag on it or something like, the recumbent guys do. But this is just like, that would be completely dangerous and foolish. If you put one of these up against a Chevy Silverado and you expected that Silverado to see you in traffic at 45 miles per hour. So yeah, I think so many of these vehicles become very, one can establish community, like you mentioned, Julia. Slowing down people can establish community, creates more connection, more eye contact, more experience with the environment around you. And then also, again, to a nod to the AV world, when you think about when you're sharing roads with autonomous vehicles that are regulated, that don't speed, can't speed, don't have the ability to, you're talking about a very good environment. So I think there's a lot happening in the world right now that we should be really excited about. Lowering speed limits, autonomous vehicles, new modes that are attractive and mainstream people will want to buy them. And, these are not virtue signalers or, people that like, are politically aligned to buy a bike or anything. These are just, they're buying it because they're the best vehicle. I think when you have a lot of these things going on, you show a lot of room for mass adoption. And that's exciting.
Great. All right.
Cool. Well, speaking of community, Julia, we have maybe the entrepreneur, founder, and CEO who's done more for the micromobility community within a subset of a mode than anyone, and that is Kyle Doerksen, the founder and CEO of Onewheel. The probably also the brand that's done the best job of like they're like the Kleenex of micromobility, right? Like we call an entire category Onewheel, but that's actually the name of the brand. But there's a lot of other Onewheels other than Onewheel in the category. But they've done such a good job with community and brand building that they kind of own the category. So we have Kyle on the show today to talk about a ton of things, including, of course, his amazing event coming up and others. So, all right, Kyle Doerksen, the founder and CEO of Onewheel. Welcome to Ride On. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
Great. So, Kyle, we had just given you a bit of an introduction, talking about we were talking about urban community and the way that so many micromobility devices can help actually bring urban communities together and create more of a connection to a shared environment, shared surroundings. And you specifically, I think, Kyle, in your company, Onewheel, has done an amazing job building what I think is one of the most robust communities in the micromobility space with Onewheel. So let's just jump in. Like, how did you do that? How did you how did you build such an amazing community? What advice would you give to other people that are trying to build communities like you've built?
Well, I think, communities build themselves, right? So all you can do is kind of, nudge them and support them. And, really it's been for us a grassroots community building movement, right? Where riders in different areas bring together fellow riders or people who haven't ridden before. And I think it's obviously similar to sort of the history with motorcycles, and especially Harley Davidson and stuff like that, where people love getting together and riding together. And then of course you're riding together, then you're like, hey, maybe we should compete, and then maybe we should go do there's groups that deliver food on Onewheel to people in need, right? So it's if we're gonna go riding anyway, what else can we do? And I think it's become a really interesting phenomenon of Onewheel riding groups and group rides all over the world now, and also now pretty big festivals and Onewheel oriented events, right, where it's a long weekend and there's races and activities, and some of them you bring your whole family, some of them are more like the Burning Man with even more Onewheels, and so it's a pretty interesting set of events that has emerged around this, and it's really come from the grassroots.
Okay, so again, not the best takeaway for other entrepreneurs. You just sort of said it happens. So I'm not sure what they're supposed to take away from that, but that does make sense in a way. Sounds like maybe just the type of vehicle will allow it to happen. In
Yeah, I mean,
terms
I
of
think
your community,
we've definitely supported it, in various ways, and we've done Onewheel racing now for a while. And the culminating at the end of the year, the Race for the Rail, which is our signature Onewheel racing event, is coming up September 7th to 9th. And it's been kind of cool is that we've been able to have some of these Onewheel festivals and regional races become qualifiers for that event. And so it kind of aligns all of us so we can promote each other's events and kind of create this cool structure that's familiar to anyone that's been involved in sports or racing, right? Is like there's always some world championship that you have to work your way to, and so that's what we have now with Onewheel racing.
Kyle, are you going to try to get into the Olympics? Like at some point, are you going to try to get into some of these bigger competitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be really cool. I think we think a lot about the history of snowboarding, right? And when snowboarding, became an Olympic sport, it was really a breakthrough moment, where before that, snowboarders were just like the crazy people and they were just troublemakers and so on and so forth, right? And with the Olympic moment, suddenly it was on the world stage. It became a much more global phenomenon rather than clustered in a few countries, where snowboarding had started taking off. And it really got a lot more organized and official, and that allowed it to grow and attract a lot more people. Where snowboarding then kind of rocketed up from maybe 10% of people on the mountain to more like 50%, where it's ended up, which has been really, really cool. But I think there's a lot of similarities, with what we're doing. I mean, I think people still look at Onewheel and they think like, wow, that's really crazy and that's niche and that's not a mainstream thing. But we're working our way there, right? And it's definitely, growing significantly over the last couple of years. And getting a lot more new people into sport.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you have like snowboarding is a great example. If you just looked at it, someone dropped you on Earth and they're like, wait, I'm gonna put these things on my body. I'm gonna fly down this mountain on snow, and basically everyone does it, right? There's a pretty good mass adoption of skiing and snowboarding. Like I think what you mentioned there is like you have a similar problem with Onewheel, which I've been around, see a lot of Onewheels out by the beach. And every time I'm with someone that hasn't ridden one before, they're like, "Oh, that looks crazy," right? Where you don't see snowboarding and go, "Oh, that looks crazy." Like, what is the Olympics is maybe it, but like, what what are the steps you think that need to be taken so that someone's not like, oh, that looks crazy. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go one wheeling this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the stuff needs to evolve, right? And part of it is just the passing of time, right? I think we've already experienced a lot of different moments, with the one wheel product, where in the early days, you're riding, people would just be like, what is that thing, And now they know that it's called the one wheel, and they've seen somebody riding it before, and based on the kind of people they've seen riding it, they've formed their opinions about who it's for and that kind of thing. So we're kind of in that stage of evolution. And I think we're also in a stage where, there can't just be like one like normative one-wheeling culture. Like we actually have to create several, because as much as we like encouraging racing, for instance, I'm not a racer. I could never hang with those people. It's out of reach for a lot of people that are especially starting. It's aspirational, but hey, it's fine to be just a cruising around the neighborhood one-wheel rider, and you're going to have a lot of fun. And in fact, that's who, the majority of our customers are, right? And some of them, are like, hey, I need to go ride mountain trails. And some subset of them are like, hey, I need to go race. And so it's kind of this interesting thing where it's like it's a participant sport, but it's also becoming a spectator sport in a sense, right? Where you're watching these, world's best people, and it is amazing what they can do, right? And even though you understand you might not be able to do that, you imagine that you could maybe do that. And so I think that's how these sort of sports evolve. And then, I'm talking about it here as a sport, but it is really this interesting intersection between, sport and transportation, right? Similar to maybe cycling, right? You can cycle in the Tour de France, or you can, cycle to school. Same with skateboarding, right? You can skateboard to get around town. You're in Southern California. We're up here in Santa Cruz. See a lot of people skating to get from here to there. But then there's also skate parks, and people ride just to have fun and blow off steam and all that good stuff. So I think it's been really interesting building in that intersection.
Yeah, and so I want to kick over to Julia, ask one more question about the race coming up, because again, I believe, as far as I know, it's like the first here, at least here in the U.S., like nationally syndicated micromobility style race. So you've got on ESPN. So it sounds like you're on ESPN2, September 8th and 9th. It's called Race for the Rail, which is your world championship. How did you get the ESPN to cover this? Like, I know they're famous for, of course, covering some of these types of things before they become mainstream and making them mainstream. But yeah, I'm just curious how that ESPN deal went down.
Yeah. So the one that's coming up September, in September is basically, that one's going to be streamed. ESPN just re-aired last year's race, and they're likely going to air this year's race, although not live as far as I know. But yeah, it's really interesting. They're looking for what the new emerging trends are, right, and what people are interested in. And of course, in the age of the internet, there's a million microcosms and communities of people doing all kind of crazy stuff. And I think one-wheel racing is really compelling to watch, right? Because the format that's evolved, it's bordercross, it's off-road, they're going fast, there's thrills and spills, it's just classic racing. I think, we've grown that over the years. We've streamed the last several Race for the Rails we've done, with growing audiences. And now it's to the point where, TV networks are interested in showing it, because there's just a lot of people interested in stuff, and it makes for good TV.
It's killer. Over to you, Julia.
Amazing. Yeah, well, we would love to come to the race. It sounds fantastic. And Kyle, maybe
you can actually this year. So the last couple of races we have not had spectators because of COVID, but this year we're back to having live spectators. So people that do want to come up, they can check out our website or One Wheel Racing League, and get tickets and come join live.
Amazing. All right. Well, hope to see you there. And Carl, maybe a final question for me, and then we'll close out the interview, is just around manufacturing. So you all build in California. You've built in California since the beginning. How's that going? Are you going to still do that? Or are you thinking about switching it up?
Yeah. So we have built every one wheel in California, which has been really awesome. And when we introduced Pint, which is back in 2019, we actually insourced the manufacturing. So it's now at a facility that is our facility with our staff building every one wheel. And it's been a great experience. I think we've been able to really invest in improvements in, quality and throughput and stuff like that, if you're working with a contract manufacturer overseas, a lot of that stuff kind of gets glossed over. And there's a lot of reasons why, it was important for me to build domestically. First of all, I just love manufacturing. And so it's cool to be able to, employ people and build the manufacturing machine to build a new type of product. Also there aren't a lot of, just ready to go factories that are already building one wheel type products. It's a little bit different than, say, the bike industry, right? Where there's a lot of contract manufacturing. There's a lot of contract manufacturing capability and capacity, to the extent that, you can send your napkin sketch and get back, an e-bike that's pretty decent, right? From any number of contract manufacturers. That is really not the case with our product, because we developed all the IP, all the technology. We're designing the motors, we're designing the motor controls, we're designing the battery modules, battery management systems, and all that stuff in-house. And so having it, closely managed in our own manufacturing, flow really, really worked well for us. And it's allowed us to, keep quality really high, be dynamic on making any changes that we need to make. You also flex with demand, right? So obviously through COVID, we saw demand go down and then up, and then, so just keeping up with that, and not looking at, a bunch of inventory that's on containers for 3 or 4 months, which, I spoke to a lot of people, in the bike industry and whatnot, that, we're facing that. So we were able to really track with that changing demand, which was another key advantage, of manufacturing here.
Amazing, Kyle. I think that's a really interesting answer. And we've heard most recently from Vela Bikes, but from a few other bike manufacturers, from some micromobility manufacturers that are based out of the US that are now reshoring their manufacturing because of exactly the reasons that you enumerated, plus some increasing political support for just doing domestic manufacturing of all types of electric mobility. But hopefully, at some point the legislation will cover micromobility as well. So glad to have you in California. Glad to have you on the show. And thanks for the shout out about the race for the rail coming up in September. And they'll be sure to link to that in the show notes so that folks have an opportunity to see the competition in person before it premieres at the LA 28 Olympics.
Yeah, as Julia said, great work. And thanks for coming on the show. And we'll see you also in October at Micromobility America.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. That's one of my favorite events of the year.
Awesome. Great. See you soon. Good luck with everything, Kyle.
Cool. Take care. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Kyle.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Julia, that's it. Show's going a little long. We got to get on those one wheels. We'll see Kyle, I guess, next in September on the race on ESPN. I'll tune in.
I mean, you're competing, right? Like, I'm competing. I've already got my number.
No, I would
Yeah.
not. You're going to win. I'm going to be on your race team. I'm going to fix your wheel when it breaks down.
Yeah, exactly. Got to get it right. I'm back from trikes to one wheel. But James, seriously, we should think about doing a competition for micromobility in the future. One of the conferences.
Well, yeah, and for anyone interested that will be in California in October at the Expo, definitely, and have a nice chance. And if you haven't ridden a one wheel, they're pretty magical. So hopefully we can get people on one wheels in California in October.
Amazing. All right, James. Well, what do we say at the end of these shows?
Right on, Julia.
Right on. See you later.